Carlos Alcaraz might have just saved the US Open. As of today, the tournament is 8 days away, the singles draw ceremony happens this Thursday, and the defending champion is officially back in the field after a wrist injury nobody could put a timeline on for 4 straight months. No warm-up matches, no tune-up event, just a straight walk back into the most pressurized stadium in tennis, and a single photo that turned a US Open that was missing its biggest star into appointment viewing again. That's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what was on the line here. Rewind to January. Alcaraz opens the year by winning the Australian Open, becoming the youngest man in the Open era to complete the career Grand Slam. He's playing some of the best tennis of his life, racing out to a start that has fans and analysts openly wondering if this is the season he pulls away from the pack for good. Then, in April, at the Barcelona Open, something in his wrist goes wrong. He still grinds out a straight sets win over Otto Virtanen 6-4, 6-2, but pulls out the very next day before his second-round match. Nobody watching that week thinks much of it. It looks like the kind of thing that costs a player a week, maybe 2. It costs him 4 months. And in those 4 months, the sport lost its center of gravity. This wasn't a player limping through a rough patch on the schedule. This was the most electric performer in tennis, at the absolute peak of his powers, disappearing right as the season was supposed to explode into its biggest stretch. For over 120 days, the defending champion of the US Open simply vanished from tour. Not slowed down, not playing through pain, gone. And every week he stayed gone, the sport felt a little smaller. You can schedule around an absence. You cannot replace a generational talent, and the entire summer proved it. The official explanation was a wrist injury. On paper, that sounds routine. Players get hurt, they rest, they come back. But this wasn't a bruise. It wasn't a tweak that needed a few days of ice. It was tenosynovitis, inflammation of the tendon sheath in his right wrist. For a weekend player, that's a nuisance. For a professional whose entire game is built on generating violent, whip-fast racket head speed on command, it's something closer to a direct hit on the exact mechanism that makes him who he is. That's what made every update about his recovery feel so much bigger than a normal injury story. Fallout came fast, and it kept compounding. He was gone from Roland Garros, a title he wanted to defend on the clay he loves. He watched Wimbledon from home while the grass court season passed without him. Madrid, Rome, the Canadian Open, all scratched. Even a planned hard-court tune-up in Cincinnati got scrapped at the last minute when the wrist still wasn't ready for real match conditions. For a stretch there, the tennis world wasn't asking when does he come back, it was quietly bracing for the possibility that he might not come back at all this season. Then, with the hard-court swing winding down and the last Grand Slam of the year looming over New York, Alcaraz answered every doubt at once. 1 photo, kit on, 2 words, here we go. New York just got its king back, and the timing could not have mattered more. Here's what most people watching from the outside don't fully appreciate. Tennis runs on rivalry. It survives on the friction between its best players pushing each other to the absolute limit. Everyone expected this entire season to be defined by Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner trading blows the way they had before. Instead, injuries and inconsistent form at the top scrambled that storyline completely, and the tour spent months without its signature fight. The matches kept happening, the results kept coming in. But something was obviously missing, and everyone in the sport knew exactly what it was. Think about what that actually looked like from the outside. Broadcasters kept cutting to empty storylines. Commentators kept comparing whoever was in the final that week to the version of tennis Alcaraz and Sinner were supposed to be playing against each other. Ratings dipped in ways that had nothing to do with the quality of the tennis being played and everything to do with who wasn't on the court. A sport this dependent on star power doesn't just lose a player when someone like Alcaraz disappears, it loses its entire narrative engine for months at a time. That's the void Alcaraz is walking back into, and it's a massive one. Despite missing a third of the season, he's still walking into Flushing Meadows ranked world number 2. He isn't creeping into this draw as a forgotten name hoping to sneak a run. He's stepping directly into the spotlight as one of the outright favorites, and his presence alone gives this tournament the stakes it was missing all summer. There's another detail that makes his return even bigger for the sport right now. Jannik Sinner didn't just hold serve while Alcaraz was gone, he won Wimbledon in July, his 5th major title, and looked every bit the uncontested number one. But the knee issue that forced him out of Cincinnati means even Sinner is walking into New York without a truly clean bill of health. Reports have him working through treatment and testing the knee on hard courts in the lead-up to the tournament. That means the two players who were supposed to define this entire season are both walking into its final Grand Slam carrying real questions about their bodies, which makes Alcaraz's return even more essential to the tournament's drama. Somebody had to bring the stakes back. He just did. Here's where the comeback gets genuinely remarkable. Alcaraz's forehand isn't built like everyone else's. It's a full-body kinetic chain, legs, hips, and torso coiling together and channeling everything upward into one explosive snap through the wrist. That's the source of the impossible angles, the passing shots other players can't even set up for. It's his signature weapon, and it's the exact joint that just spent 4 months in recovery. So when the tendons around that joint became inflamed, this was never just pain management. It was a direct threat to the one mechanism that makes Alcaraz Alcaraz, which is exactly why getting back to full health matters so much for what comes next. History isn't kind to players with wrist injuries like this one. For a modern, heavy topspin baseliner, a wrist problem isn't only physical, it becomes psychological. It plants a seed of doubt in every single swing. Juan Martín del Potro and Dominic Thiem both hit with similar violence, and both saw their careers altered by wrist trouble that never fully let go. Knowing that history makes what Alcaraz's team pulled off even more impressive. During the layoff, Alcaraz and his team went quiet and got to work. No beach recovery, no public rehab tour, just a slow, methodical rebuild on the practice courts in Murcia. That process eventually led to high-intensity hitting sessions with Holger Rune, pushing the joint against real tour-level pace in a controlled setting before the team finally greenlit a New York return. That's not the profile of a team that's rushing a fragile player back for the headline. That's the profile of a team that believes the injury is actually behind them. This isn't even the first time Alcaraz has had to walk back into competition carrying doubt about his own body, and history is on his side here too. Back in 2023, an abdominal injury kept him out for nearly 4 months. His first tournament back wasn't a Grand Slam, it was a smaller event in Argentina, a low-pressure stage to rebuild rhythm before the real tests came. He reached the final in his very first tournament back, not a quiet first-round exit to shake off the rust. A final, against a genuine opponent in his first match of the season, straight off a 4-month layoff. If that's the template, betting against him this time might be the mistake. Best of 5 tennis is a brutal test of endurance and rhythm, and every player in this draw knows exactly where to aim early. The wrist. Alcaraz will be facing opponents who've spent the entire summer grinding on hard courts, dialed-in timing, built-up calluses, lungs ready for 4-hour wars. That's the challenge. But challenges like this are exactly where Alcaraz has made his name. To get through the opening rounds clean, Alcaraz doesn't need to abandon his game. He just needs to be smarter with it. And everything about his skill set says he can do exactly that. Watch for more drop shots, ending points early, and pulling opponents forward instead of grinding through full extension forehands from the baseline. Watch for serve placement over raw serve power, higher first serve percentages, and sharper location instead of redlining the arm for free. Watch for more net approaches, finishing points at the net with clean volleys instead of extending rallies that put repeated load on a healing wrist. And watch for a heavier reliance on the slice backhand, keeping the ball low and forcing opponents to generate their own pace instead of feeding off his. This is exactly the kind of tactical evolution that made him the youngest man in history to complete the career Grand Slam. He's never been a player who only wins one way, and that versatility might be the single biggest reason this comeback has a real shot at working. Other players his age, with his kind of power game, would be locked into one style and hoping their body cooperates. Alcaraz has the range to change gears entirely for 2 weeks if that's what it takes, and still be dangerous doing it. Consider the draw itself too. Early round opponents at a slam aren't usually the danger. It's the deeper rounds against players who've spent the whole summer building match fitness that tend to test a returning champion. If Alcaraz's tactical adjustments hold up that long, the version of him waiting on the other side of that test is the one the rest of the tour has spent 4 months not having to face. And not everyone is convinced this is the fairy tale it looks like on the surface. Former world number 4, Jose Luis Clerc said flatly that Alcaraz should skip New York entirely and wait for the Asian swing to find his rhythm instead. Coach Rick Machi put the odds of him even playing at 50-50 as recently as last week. Andy Roddick suggested the same thing publicly, before walking it back the moment the announcement dropped. That's the split right now. Genuine tennis minds who think this is too much too soon, standing next to a fan base and a sport that are just thrilled to have him back at all. But here's what the skeptics tend to underweight. A confident Alcaraz under the lights at Arthur Ashe is a completely different problem to solve than the cautious version we might see in the opening matches. There's no other venue in tennis quite like it. Loud, chaotic, relentless, oversized in every sense. The crowd noise at Arthur Ashe doesn't politely settle between points the way it does at other majors. It builds and rolls and occasionally erupts mid-rally in a way that rattles players who aren't built for it. That environment swallows nervous players whole. Alcaraz has historically done the opposite. He feeds off it. He's always understood that in New York, winning isn't the only objective. It's the theater around the winning, and few players in the sport's history have ever been better built for that stage than he is. At just 23, with 7 Grand Slam titles already in hand, he doesn't need this run to validate anything about his career. That's actually what makes this comeback so compelling. This isn't about proving a point to the history books. It's about refusing to let 4 months on the sidelines be the story of his season, and choosing to walk directly into the toughest possible test to make sure it isn't. Whatever happens over the next 2 weeks, the impact of this return is already locked in. The moment he posted that photo, the entire tone of the US Open shifted. A tournament that spent the summer feeling like it was missing its main character suddenly has him back in the frame, carrying a storyline no scriptwriter could have built better. The champion, the injury, the silence, and the return, all compressed into 2 weeks under the brightest lights in the sport. Think about the alternative version of this tournament, the one that almost happened. A US Open without Alcaraz in the draw would have been a completely different event, dominated by talk of who was missing instead of who was playing. Instead, the draw sheet has his name back on it, and every broadcast preview this week is leading with the same photo and the same 2 words. That's the difference one healthy wrist makes to an entire sport's biggest fortnight. One quieter subplot is worth watching, and it's moving fast. Mixed doubles play begins this Monday, August 24th. And the buzz around a possible pairing with Serena Williams has only grown after the 2 traded playful comments on social media following his announcement. An official partner reveal is expected within days. It's a small thing in the grand scheme of a Grand Slam, but it's also a signal. A player who genuinely doubted his body wouldn't be adding extra matches to his schedule voluntarily, just 3 days after confirming he's even fit for singles. If that pairing actually happens, it says everything about how confident his team really is behind closed doors, and it adds one more storyline to a tournament that's suddenly overflowing with them. Strip away the drama, and here's what actually matters. A generational talent, 4 months removed from competition, walking back into the sport at the exact moment it needed him most, with the tools, the history, and the stage to make this the defining storyline of the entire tournament. That's not hype. That's just what happens when the best show in tennis gets its headliner back. Does a fully healthy Alcaraz beat this field? Every sign says yes. Does the sport look completely different with him back in the draw than it did a week ago? It already does. The US Open didn't just get its defending champion back. It got its pulse back, and that alone changes everything about how the next 2 weeks are going to feel. Whether he lifts the trophy or not, this tournament is already better for having him in it, and that's the part no ranking or injury report can measure. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Is this the tournament where Alcaraz proves the doubters wrong and reminds everyone exactly why the sport felt empty without him? A lot of people think so. Drop your prediction below and stick around because we'll be tracking every round of this comeback as it happens.